So what we're here to talk about today is a little bit about managing versions and upgrades. I'm going to cover a little bit about what's in the software and kind of how we number things. Make sure everybody's aware of that because it does come into play. I talk a little bit about some of our recommendations on how to manage multiple versions of software, how to manage what's in a version. I want to talk a little bit about what that scary word schema actually means, and make it hopefully a little less scary to you, or a little less mysterious as to what it is, and understand better how that plays into when you do need to upgrade or downgrade data in your software. So that is our goal for today. Now, I want to start, this seems obvious, but I think it's worth repeating. We certainly always want to recommend that you stay on the latest version of software possible. And that's more than just from an upgrade or downgrade standpoint. It's because that latest version of software, whatever that is, has the latest security fixes. Unfortunately, over the last particularly 3 to 5 years, security within software has become a phenomenally important thing. There are way more bad actors out there in the world than we had 5, 10, 15, 20 years ago. There are people trying to hack into your corporate systems and find any possible avenue in. And one of those avenues that's exploited a lot is out of date software, out of date drivers and stuff that are in software. So that's one of the biggest reasons why we, from the Bentley standpoint, are always going to encourage you to stay as current as you possibly can on software. It's not just about the functionality of the software, but it's about the whole ecosystem and everything you're working. Now, that also gives you the latest enhancements and the latest fixes, the bug fixes in the software. So every release is going to have more things fixed in it and more capability than the last release. Ideally, it doesn't break something new. Occasionally happens, but it's always going to be a bit better. So you want to keep up on that. Now, I will also say with that, I understand from a business side that's not always possible. And there are times when you may need to, and it may be in your best interest to stay on an older version of software. And that's why we want to talk about the upgrading here. So we're going to talk about some of those best practices and stuff when you are upgrading or when you do need to work between those. There's 4 major sections I'm going to talk about today. Real quickly, we'll go over what major and minor releases are. I want to talk a bit about schemas. We'll talk then about upgrading project files themselves. And lastly, I want to talk about workspaces. So let's get started and talk about releases. Beginning with the 23 release, Bentley started renumbering our software. Prior to that, we had always used a generational number. So we had, if you want to date way back, there were some 5s and 7s and stuff out there. But more recently, people were familiar with the V8 software, the 8 dot somethings, and then we went to 10 dot something when we went to Connect Edition. In 23, we moved over to an annual numbering scheme. So the first 2 digits of the numbers will now include the major version year that it was released. So you'll see in the application name, it'll include that major version year as well as the first 2 digits of the number. So OpenRoads Designer 2024 will begin with a 24 dot something. What that means is that piece of software, that series, the 24 series of this, the initial version of it came out in the calendar year 2024. Now, you may have versions come out in later calendar years. For example, we released some updated 2024, some minor releases in the 25 calendar year, but they're still based on that major release that started. In this case, it was originally released in December of 2024. So those first 2 digits actually pertain to the major version. The first two I just explained, those are the year. The next two are a sequencing if we ever released a second major release in a series. Now, when we talk about the difference between a major and a minor release, what we are really talking about is, did we update any of the schemas in the file? Is there any forward-backward compatibility differences that we need to be thinking about in it? We try not to ever do that within a series. So the goal, and you would generally see, you're not going to ever come off zeros in that second set of digits. And that indicates to you that any files in that 24.00 are forward and backward compatible. There's no upgrade, there's no downgrade. They are literally the exact same schemas, exact same file formats. We'll talk more about what schemas actually are here in a minute. So within that, you may have minor releases. 24.0.0 is going to be the very first one that comes out. 24.0.01 is the next one. 24.0.02 and the next one after that. Now, I will mention that a major release, per Bentley software support policy, we will support for a minimum of 3 years plus the end of the calendar year when it was released. So if the 24 release was released during that calendar year, it's supported to the end of that year, plus 3 more years after that. So that is where the 24 releases would be supported, that minimum of 3 years. The very last set of digits on here is the build number. So as we're going through generating software, we build on a number of times, going through our programming and testing kind of phases, and that's just the incremental number as we build those. Now, major releases, remember, those are the ones where you may have to do an upgrade or a downgrade. Those can always be installed side by side. And that's been true with the civil products for probably the last 5-ish years, if I'm remembering my timing right. I think we started that around 10, 11, 10, 12, maybe even a little before that. So we've been doing that for quite a while with the civil releases. I know it's more recently been added. A MicroStation can do that as well now. So you do have situations where you may have some clients or some deliverables that you need to make that are in a different version. So we allow for you to do that and install those side by side. You cannot install minor versions side by side. If you install a newer minor version, it will automatically upgrade whatever's on your machine. Remember, though, that minor versions are binarily compatible, so there's no issue there, and that's why they do not do a side-by-side install. Next, I want to get in and talk about schemas. So when we're just talking about major and minor releases, what the real difference between a major and minor is that something in this thing we call a schema has changed, meaning there's something different in the file that is upgraded or downgraded. So what is a schema? Well, first of all, I want to dispel a myth. There is no such thing as the OpenRoads Designer schema. There are multiple schemas in a file. The other thing that I want to kind of make sure everybody understands is that every file out there has a schema in it. It's become a common term that people discuss, and I guess we hear about it more around OpenRoads, but files have always had schemas. GeoPack had schemas in them. InRoads had schemas in them. MicroStation has schemas in it. All the competitor files out there all have schemas in them. They're not a scary thing. They're not a bad thing. They're a required thing. So what is a schema? The way I like to describe it and think about it is go back a few years and think about physical mail. So you could be in your apartment building or your office building, somewhere where you got a collection of people and they need to receive their physical mail. You're going to have some sort of a mailbox there, some sort of a grid of different slots of mailboxes that people can receive mail in. Now that you're going to have a certain number of mailboxes there. If you have more people move into your neighborhood or your apartment building or your office building that need to receive mail, let's say you're out of mailboxes and 30 new people move in, you've got to have somewhere to put their mail. So you enlarge the mailbox. You add 30 new boxes on there. That is effectively what a schema is. The schema is that mailbox. It's that thing where I can store information. When we add new functionality to the software, and we want to store a new property on an element, or we create a new kind of an element. For example, in the 24 release, we added capability for boreholes. So we had a new definition for what a borehole is and all the properties related to it. We needed to create mailboxes to store that information in. That is where a schema changes. We don't ever change, actually, the schemas. We don't ever delete anything out of the schemas. It only gets data added to it. More mailboxes are added so you can store new information. So when we talk about upgrading schemas, all we're really talking about doing is that newer version of software understands that it has more mailboxes it can use. It's not actually changing anything in the software. It's just looking at it saying, okay, I've got more places I can store data now, and I understand what that data is that I can put in there. Now, on the flip side, when you downgrade, you're saying, oh, I've got mailboxes here that have information in them that that piece of software over there is not going to understand. So how do I put the software into the best state possible so that when somebody in this version that can't read those mailboxes looks at it, they can hopefully glean some information out of that? So let's take the example of the boreholes. I created in the 24 release, I put some boreholes in there, everything's happy because it knows how to store those. It has a schema for those or mailboxes for those. I save that back to 2023 or to 1012 or some older version that does not have any clue what a borehole is. Well, if I just left it in the format it's in, it would have no idea how to use it. It would just totally ignore it and have nothing there. And if you tried to click on the graphics that are linked to it, it's going to have problems because it says, hey, I'm trying to link to something I can't get to. It could potentially cause crashes, all kinds of other problems. So what happens when we downgrade is we essentially look at it and say, oh, okay, you're wanting to downgrade from 2024 to 23, for example. And I look at your file and I notice that your file actually has some boreholes in it, and I know that 23 doesn't support those. So what can I do? In that case, there is nothing in 23 that could understand those boreholes, so we will strip them down to pure graphics. We'll at least maintain the graphics. It's the only thing we can maintain because 23 doesn't have that ability to read it. So that's what's happening when we talk about upgrades and downgrades. Now, to look at this a little bit further, I want to go in and use the Civil File Manager, which is a tool that can be used for a lot of different things. But one of them is to view schema information. If you're not familiar with the Civil File Manager, you can find it on the backstage, go to Civil Tools and choose Civil File Manager. Opens up a dialog kind of like this. And you can do a variety of things with it. And what I'm going to walk through here is just looking at the schemas in there. So what I've got here is I've loaded 3 different files. So what I did is I created a new file, and I did that in the 22 release 1 or the 10.12 software. Then I opened that same file in the 23 software, and I saved it to a different name. And then I opened it in the 24 software, and I saved that to a different name. And I want to kind of compare what is going on between these 3 different files as they, quote, got upgraded. So the first thing I want you to notice is when we start in the original file, this is where I created it, you will see that there are, I can't count them quickly here, 9, 10, 11 schemas in this file. Now this file was pretty simple. I think it had 1 piece of horizontal geometry in it. Might have had a terrain model in it. I can't remember when I created it. But it doesn't have much in it. But even with a small file with very little in it, there are multiple schemas here. There's 10 of them, or 9 or 10, whatever there are here. As I added more data to this file, additional schemas would get added as it needed to add those to create those mailboxes for that bits of data. Now, the schemas that are in here right now, you see the actual schema versions in the second column there. They all begin with 01, 02, 04. Those numbers mean nothing to you. We show them here, but they really don't mean anything to anybody. Nothing you can truly dig out of there that's useful. But what might be a little bit useful is the stuff on the right-hand part of the dialog where it shows which version of software that was created with. So I created these back in September. You can see they were created with the 10, 12, 2, 04 version of software, and they all match. Next, I upgraded that file to 23. So this is looking at that same file upgraded to 23. It's got the exact same schemas in it because I haven't changed any data in the file. But notice that 2 of these schemas got updated to the 23.0.0.129 version. So there was something in these 2 particular schemas that had more mailboxes in them. So the software took care of that. It said, okay, I understand something's changed here. There's a new property. There's a new something I could store. So I'm accommodating for that. I've essentially allowed for those to be stored. Didn't change any of the existing data. It just allowed for those to be stored. If we upgrade that then to the 24 release, you can see that more of them got changed. What is there? I think 7 highlighted there. That 7 different schemas got updated in that release for the data I had in this particular file. But notice that there's also 2 schemas in here that are still 10.12. They have not changed since the original version of that file. So it only updates what needs to be updated and only when it needs to be updated. Hopefully that helps you understand a little bit more about what we mean when we say schemas. And that there's not a single one. It's not like this magic thing. It's just a mailbox or a slot, essentially, to store information. They always increase. They never decrease in size. We don't get rid of stuff out of schemas. We just increase them. So upgrading software is always very, very safe because it's just adding those new storage registers in there for the new capabilities. Now, let's move over and start talking about actually upgrading files. How do we, from a Bentley perspective, what do we recommend you do, and why do we recommend it that way? Our recommendation is, and has been since we first released the software, that you upgrade files by opening them. That is the absolute best way and recommended way to upgrade a file. Simply file, open, let it do its thing. Now, I want to talk a little bit about options there and different things that you can do as you're updating that and how you deal with whole projects. First of all, as you're upgrading files, I'm sure most everybody, if not everybody on this call has done it before. You've gotten the dialogue. It does tell you what's going on. So it will tell you what version it's upgrading from, what it's upgrading to, so you can kind of see what's happening there. You do have choices. You can say, no, I don't want to do that. And if you say no, it'll still open the file, but in a read-only mode. Sometimes that can be helpful. I don't really want to upgrade it, but I do want to take a look at it. I could certainly cancel out. Or you can say yes, and if you do, we automatically create a backup file. So it's in the same folder. There's a file there. So if you accidentally hit on a file and you upgraded it and you say, oh, shoot, I didn't really mean to do that. I've got other people on my project that still needed that in 23. All you got to do is delete the file that you upgraded, rename the .back file to, or take the .back off the end of it, and you still have your original file there. So we've added that years ago just as a security thing for people because they wanted that backup. You didn't want to have to depend on downgrade or anything else. Just it's there for you. So keep that in mind. Now, you do have the option to suppress these prompts too. So if you want to set up your environment and say, I don't want to give the users the choice of whether or not they can upgrade, whether or not they can open read only, you can set it up to work a certain way. So you may say, no, they can't ever upgrade a file. We're going to take care of that separate. If they've got the new version, it's going to always open read only, or maybe after a certain point in time, you switch it in your workspace and say, yep, now it's going to update. You do have some controls over that if you want to do that. And you can turn that upgrade prompting off. This is one of the config variables to turn the prompting off. I didn't think I listed the others in here, but there's a couple others where you can control some of that behavior. Because one of the things that you've got to be thinking about if you have a larger team, let's say you've got 2 or 5 or 10 or 20 people working on a project, that's where upgrading can get a little bit, you need to manage how you're going to do it. Because if you're just upgrading by opening files and 2 of the 10 on your team have a newer version of software than the others, it could become problematic because they may open a file and it upgrades, and now somebody else on that team needs to use that same file. They're not, and they have older software, they're not going to be able to open it, read, write any. They would need to either downgrade that file or upgrade their software. So within a project team, it does make sense to try to keep them on the same software. Now, the flip to that is, let's say the project team was all upgraded to the new version, and you start updating the files just by opening them. So somebody goes and opens the corridor file as an example. It's going to upgrade automatically just because they opened it. Does it matter that the terrain file or the geometry file or something else hasn't been upgraded yet? No, it really doesn't. The software is built to handle that. To say, okay, I can reference older stuff. That's not a problem. As long as all the people on the project have the newer version of software, and as they touch each file, it upgrades that file to that version and they move on. I'll talk in a minute about how to bulk upgrade them all if you're not comfortable with that and you do want to just upgrade your entire project. But understand it's not necessarily required. We've never had that intention that you have to go through and update all files at once. The testing, the approach behind the software is that you upgrade them as you need to upgrade each file and let it work. Now, something that we did start adding that can be helpful for you, we started adding in the 23 release, we started logging this. We actually keep a cookie crumb or a file history in your DGN files now. So you can tell when a file was created or used in a version, and when and if it was upgraded to or downgraded to a different version. So you will see that information in there. For example, in the message center here, this is a very simple one, but we can see in here 2 lines. The original version the file was used in was 23.0.0.129. And then on September 5th of this year at 1934 and 54 seconds, it was upgraded to version 24.0.2.25. If I had downgraded that or upgraded it to other versions, you will see a linear tracking of that. So you can go back now and look at files and say, okay, what's going on with this? Has somebody upgraded? Has it downgraded in the process? If you want to look at that, the key in for that is civil space file history. That will write the information to the message center. Then you open up the message center as I'm showing on the screen here, and you're able to see that. So, question. Do all files need to be opened and upgraded before continuing work on my project? And I kind of alluded to this a minute ago. If I've got terrains and geometries and corridors and all these different files, do I really have to update them all at once? And the answer is really no, you don't. We're not intending for you to have to do that. Understand you may want to, for managing your project. We'll talk about that next, but you don't have to. It's built to be able to handle that. The corridors will still process correctly if they're referencing things that are in an older version. When you upgrade those files, everything will work and it will keep itself up to date. So what if you do want to upgrade the whole project? Let's say you're just not comfortable with this approach of file by file upgrading and you want to make sure you upgrade it all. What I would recommend, and what we're recommending as the best practice there, is still to use the same methodology. Use the file open methodology. That is the most robust, best way to upgrade files. So if you want to batch those up, marry that up with the batch processing tool to process multiple files and update them at once. You can find that on the backstage under Tools, Batch Process. If you're not familiar with it, it's a tool that's been in MicroStation for, 20, 25, 30 years. So it's nothing new, nothing fancy. It's this dialog here. What it allows you to do is come in here and add a list of files. You can see the list. I've only got 4 at the bottom, but you could easily grab whole folders, add dozens, hundreds of files to here very quickly. So you can add them to there. And then you specify a command file. At the top, you see where it says command file batch upgrade.txt. In that text file, you tell it what to do. Well, honestly, we don't need to do anything. All we need to do is open the file. So your command file could actually be blank in this case. Just it's going to open the file, do nothing. Once it opens it, open the next file, do nothing. Open the next file, do nothing. That's all it needs to do. It's going to cycle through them and do the opening. Now, 2 things that I will point out in here, if you do work on this or try to use this, is that you can set it, the initial mode up at the top, and then the mode or the models of each file that you open. You can tell it which models you're going to open there. So that initial model that I'm opening, I do not need to open every file or every model in the file. Say you have a 2D model, a 3D model, you don't have to open them both because we'll upgrade the whole file. You just open one. So keep it set easy. You don't have to go through them all. Or let's say you had a cross-section file. You don't have to switch to every model. Open one, open the default model. It's going to update the whole file. So just leave your initial model and the individual models in the files. Keep those set to default. That way it just opens the one and it keeps moving through. Now, I said the text file, the command processing file, you don't really need anything in, and you certainly don't, but there are a few things that you may want to put in there. The first one is the line in blue, the one you see kind of right in the middle, and that is if you're doing this batch processing, you're not going to want to sit there every time it tries to upgrade a file and have to click yes on that prompt of do you want to open this file or not. So you very much might want to set that variable to turn that prompting off so that it can just open the files in series. This is an easy way to do that and not have to change your workspace. We're just expanding and setting that variable on the fly as we're opening the files and prohibiting that from running. Another one that's the couple that are down at the bottom that a lot of people like to do when they process this is maybe compress each file and do a save settings or a file design as you're exiting each one, just to kind of clean the files up, keep them as small as you can, just a little bit of maintenance. Nothing you have to do, but something you could do. Now, the third one that I want to talk about is the Civil File Manager. There is a mechanism in the Civil File Manager that will allow you to do upgrading of files. I'm going to discourage you from using that. Again, I'm going to go back to the recommendation of load the files, just open them. That's the best way to do it. The Civil File Manager was originally created to help upgrade those V8i files, the SS4s and SS10s, to Connect Edition. Now, because people have come back over the years and kept asking, hey, add this capability, add this capability, add this capability, the Civil File Manager can be used to upgrade Connect Edition to Connect Edition files. However, I will be honest with you and tell you that the process it goes through to do the upgrading, Because the software is not fully running when the Civil File Manager is. It is slightly different than just doing a file open on them. And robust-wise, and the error checking and all the things that we do are stronger by doing a file open than they are running in that kind of offline, separate Civil File Manager mode. So I'd highly encourage to upgrade files or do your processing there in the file open mode, not using the Civil File Manager. If you do choose to use the Civil File Manager, a couple things to be aware of. First of all, it does allow you to load files, folders plus subfolders, similar to what you could do with the batch processing. Once you load those, though, you do have to run an additional action in here before you can do the upgrades. And that is you have to go into the action list and run what's called an upgrade list. That is then going to go through and process all the reference files and try to understand how things are related together, because that was very, very critical in updating the VAI data. Very, very critical in that. So it's got, again, the roots kind of in that. Until you run that process, you will see that the upgrade tools are grayed out. Once you run this upgrade list process, then you would be able to get to those tools. Now, when you run that upgrade list, what it's going to do is go analyze if there are any missing references. So here's an example where this upgrade group, this set of files, was missing the super elevation file in the upgrade. You can go through and run the upgrade. There's two different options in here. There's an upgrade all and an upgrade all force. The original tool was upgrade all, and what we see on the left here is the result of that. And what it comes back with essentially and says is, hey, I can't do this because I'm missing some references. I'm not going to allow you to upgrade everything because I don't know what's going on there. Again, remembering this has its roots back to upgrading V8i files, not Connect Edition files. So it would stop you from proceeding. On the right side is the tool called Upgrade All Force, which is the force being, hey, I don't care if there's an error, don't care what the error is, go process it anyway. Most likely the thing that you're forcing there is that the references that it found or were missing, you just say, hey, ignore that, go ahead and upgrade the files anyway, because connect to connect, we're going to deal with that. It's not a big deal if the references are missing, because we've got the information we need otherwise kind of stored in the files. So you can get away with that force with the Connect Edition files, which is where people had asked for it to be added. All right, continuing on, I want to now talk about workspaces. Because I hear a lot about workspaces and the challenges that people have in upgrading workspaces between releases. So I want to really discuss what is truly necessary and what is preference here. Because most of it is honestly preference. So let's start with a scenario here. I have a 2023 workspace. It's still being used on a 2023 projects. I'm going to start a new project in 2024. What do I need to do? Do I need two versions of the workspace? Do I need both a 23 and a 24? Can the newer software, can the 24 software use the 23 workspace? Can the 23 software use the 24 workspace if I upgrade it? There's kind of three main options you've got there. The answer is you do not need two workspaces. Newer software can always use an older workspace. So the 2024 software can use an older workspace, DGN libraries coming from 10, 12, 23, or 24, its current one. Even if you do that, new features will work. So let me go back to, I've been using the borehole example a little bit here. In the 24 release, we added borehole functionality. So if I was still pointed to a workspace, say from 23, it's not going to have any of my borehole definitions in it. Does that mean I cannot use boreholes at all? Or does it mean if I went and I use some other tool that's maybe got a new property to it, that it won't work? No, it doesn't mean that at all. We build the software. OpenRoads and OpenRail Designer are built intentionally. And part of our test base when we're adding new functionality is that it must work with no workspace behind it. Which also means if it's using an older workspace that doesn't have that part defined, it's still going to be fine and it's still going to work. Now, is it going to be on the level that you want it on? No, it's not, because it doesn't know where you want it. It may not be in the color or the particular hatching or the font that you want, because you haven't added that preference of what you want in there, but it will work. So there's not an absolute requirement that you ever upgrade a workspace for that newer version. The reason you would upgrade it is because you do want to set something up that's new there. Let's say the boreholes. You do want to use that. You do want to go in and set it up and say, this is the color and the level that I want them on and the shapes that I want to use and the patterning I want to use, etc. Now, the flip side of that is not true. You cannot, a 23 version of software, an older version of software, cannot use a newer workspace. So if I go back to the scenario that I had a minute ago, let me just back up to that one. This was the one I had. If we go back to this scenario and you have 23 there, you're starting some new 24 projects, you really have two choices. You could start your new 24 projects and point them to the 23 workspace. That's fine. Or you could create two workspaces and say, you know what, I do want to create a 24 because I do want to set up boreholes or some other new functionality that's in there. And I do want to set that up, so I'm going to create that new workspace, and I'm going to point my 23 projects to one and my 24 projects to the other. Now let's talk through another scenario here. So I started a project in 1012. It was using a 1012 workspace. It was set up lovely. Let's just assume everything was perfect and good at that point. Now you've upgraded both the workspace and the project files to something newer, 23 or 24. And you've made some changes in your workspace, voluntary kind of changes. Let's say you decided to change the level name of something or the color of something or how something's displayed. You've made some choices where you've decided that workspace is going to behave a little different than it did before or look a little different. So what is the scenario that I have? So I've got both project files, my DGNs, as well as my workspace. Well, the DGNs, the project files, they actually have a cached version of the workspace inside of them. So they are still going to know about how that was defined the last time or when they were created, essentially. So that would have been created from the 1012 workspace. That's what they're going to understand. They're not automatically going to say, oh, that workspace was updated, and I see that you changed the color from orange to blue. And so I should update myself to now show in blue instead of orange, or level name, or whatever else it might be. That does not automatically happen, and that is intentional. We don't want that to automatically happen because we don't want your project data changing without your knowledge. You, as the designer or the engineer behind this, may not realize that the CAD admin team changed the color of that. And your hours from your release, you don't want to deal with that headache. So we intentionally do not bring those on automatically. What we do is we provide you the way when you're ready to say, hey, go out now to my workspace and bring in any updates that are in there because I do want to take those on. We give you that synchronization kind of capability in there. So I do not have to ever update those things. I can kind of choose to update them when I want. And the way that we do that is through updating our project files. Well, the primary way that we update the core part of the project file is through a utility called update standards from dgnlib. You're going to run this from within the Explorer. This is a civil specific tool. So when I say civil specific, it runs in OpenRoads and OpenRail Designer. You go into Explorer, right click on the schema or the file name. This file name happened to be called schema upgrade-2024, but I'm right clicking on the file name of the current file that I'm in, and you choose update standards from DGN library. What that's going to do is it's going to look through your local DGN, and it's going to look through your active workspace, whatever workspace you currently have opened up with this file. And if it finds like named definitions, it's going to bring the latest copy of it from the workspace and replace it in the local file. Now that includes everything that could be impacted in the file, not just the civil specific stuff. So it's going to start there with, say, your feature definitions and your feature symbologies, your annotation groups and definitions. But it's also going to pick up all of the components that those are based on. Things like element templates and levels and item types and label definitions and text styles and dimension styles and you name it. There's a whole bunch more listed here. And I possibly missed a few even on this list. But the idea is when you run this, it's a one-time thing. You go in and you run it, and it brings everything from the workspace down and updates everything in your local file. So you don't have to worry about going and running individual commands of, oh, I need to go update my levels, and I need to go update my element templates or my item types all individually. This update standards from DGNlib will pick up all of those. You can run this interactively like I've shown here by right-clicking on it and running it, or you can use the same batch processing tool that we talked about with the open files and run it there. If you do want to run it in a batch, the key in to run this is dgnlib space update space all. So you could even add this to that same command file that I showed you earlier. So as I upgrade files, I'm going to upgrade it. I'm going to update standards from DGN library. I'm going to compress it, save settings, and then get out. So you can start hooking these together and adding multiple commands into that. It's another one of the reasons why those kind of upgrades where you can add some additional cleanliness into it are recommended over just the kind of flat upgrade that comes from the Civil File Manager. So another question. If you do run update standards from DGN library, is there additional rework that's going to be needed in the file? Am I going to have to go back and redo something? And the best answer I can give you to that is possibly. Now, our goal is to always get that to a no. You know, it should just upgrade and everything's going to be the same as it was before, and everything's going to be happy. But I say possibly because there could be certain situations where somebody may have changed something in the workspace that's enough different from what it was defined before that you may have to react to that. One example is, let's say a particular annotation definition, somebody went in there in the new workspace and completely changed how that was annotating stuff, and maybe it's now twice as big as it used to be. You may have to go do some repositioning of that because it's bigger than it used to be, and it may be overlapping things. That's not the software doing that. That is somebody who made a conscious decision to make a change like that in the workspace that you may have to react to. There are other conditions, and there's one on here that I'm aware of right now where we do have a software issue that could be causing a problem, and that is upgrading survey annotations causes them to revert back to their original positions. So they snap back. So you've gone in, maybe you've annotated some survey data, you've moved that annotation to a new position to make it more readable. You update the annotation in any manner. Doesn't have to be an upgrade from DGN standards, but somehow you re-annotate it, but this would cause that. And those annotations are going to bounce back to their default location. That's a problem. That has been fixed. We have added white space management for points, including survey points, in the 2025 release. So this won't be an issue anymore once you get to the 25 release. But if you are on any of the older releases, that is an example that could trip you up a little bit there and cause some problems. The next thing I want to mention here is a utility called the Civil Feature Remapper. So this is something we put together a number of years ago. Was originally done to help people upgrade from V8i to Connect Edition. But it's since been extended to really help any kind of remapping of data from one, think about it as a workspace definition to another. So the big challenge is, and where it came from V8i to Connect originally is, you may have had a lovely set of geometry and corridors set up in V8i, but because the graphics level of the software then was a whole lot different than what you're dealing with today and wanting to get out of it, you may have not worried too much about how you named your points in your template. Or you may have had majority of the points in the template all going to the default level as far as the graphics that it drew, because you didn't really care about those. You only set the ones that you really cared about. Maybe it was the top center line and your edge of pavement and the couple things that you really wanted to control. And the subgrade ones, yeah, it was generating them, but you didn't really care, so you didn't worry about the naming or the symbology behind them, things like that. So you needed to do that kind of cleanup work so that when you brought this data in, you could say, hey, what I used to do, I don't want anymore. I want you to now to map over to what I've got set up in my new workspace. So for example, the center line, maybe it was supposed to be red instead of yellow, or the pavement layer wasn't picking up the right material definition to look the way you wanted it or be on the right level. That's what this tool allows you to do. It works on the ITL and IRD file directly. So remember, I said it had its origins back in moving from V8i to Connect. And that's why it'll work on those, but still working on the ITL file today can make sense for you. You're still using those. IRD file more coming from V8i. It also works directly within the DGN. So if you have just a Connect file and you need to go in and remap some things like template drop point names, component names, terrain, linear geometry, point geometry, the corridor itself, all of these things can be remapped now with this utility. The utility is run from the backstage. So you go to Backstage, Civil Tools, Civil Feature Remapper to start this. When you do, and it lets you remap these 5 things that we'll kind of continue to talk about, it is going to bring up a dialog that looks something like this, the one on the left. Now, the first thing that you define is a configuration file of what you're going to remap. And that's what's blown up a little bit more on the right side of the screen. As we work across the screen, there's a couple key parts to this. One of them is this definition file right here, this remapping file. So this is an Excel spreadsheet that's going to define what happens. We'll see that here in a moment, an example of that spreadsheet. But it's defining that I'm going to go find this old name and I'm going to change it to a new name or other properties within it. So this is the kind of heart of the definition is going to be in this spreadsheet. The second thing you define is, am I working in an active DGN? Am I just processing DGN or Connect Edition data or OpenRoads data? Or am I reaching to an external file, an ITL or an IRD file, and just editing that directly? And then last, you define which of the, 8 different things that we can remap here, which of those you want to remap, and which tab or worksheet within this spreadsheet contains that remapping information. So that's what's defined on this slide. Now that remapping spreadsheet looks something like this. The blue columns are the requireds. The orange columns are optional. So what we're doing is saying, if you find something named CL, and this happens to be template points is what we're remapping here. If you find something called CL in the existing template, in the IATL, IRD, or DGN, could be run against any, but if I find that, rename that point to linear template points, pavement, TL underscore centerline. However you have that defined in your workspace now. If I find the point CL aggregate bottom, rename it to this name. So you're simply doing these renamings. The optional columns in here allow you to put in optional qualifiers for things. So what I'm saying is that if I find the CL and it must have an existing point style of P Kogo main CL, and it must be on a current template called Urban 2-lane, then rename it. But if I found CL on a different template or using a different style from the existing definition, do not rename it. Do something different with it. So it allows you to get very detailed on the information. When you set these files up, we will actually read the file that you're trying to translate, and we will populate this first column for you. So you don't have to go find all these. It'll go find them and populate them. There is also a way to have it read your workspace and populate it so that this last column becomes a pick list. So you don't have to sit here and type in all of this information. Very, very, very useful command, because this can even be used for remapping in your OpenRoads or OpenRail. Maybe you are moving between one workspace and another where you've made a lot of significant changes and you need to remap that data. Or maybe you've received some files in from another party who didn't use your workspace. So you need to take their data and remap it into your workspace. A lot of different uses for it. So keep this one in mind. The last one that I want to point out today is if you do have drainage data in your files, there is one more step to this. And what this will do is compare the OpenFlows settings stored in your DGN library to what is stored in the DGN. It goes along with the update from DGN library, but it's been separated out with the drainage because of the way some of the drainage data works. So it does that updating of the catalogs, the prototypes, etc., within the drainage information. So you would need to go in and run this one separate if you had drainage information in there. And with that, I think we are right on time to wrap this up today.